And the world doesn't look that bad out there. There's green grass. Cleared saved data can be saved. Data saved here will allow you to begin a new game with some of what you earned during the playthrough. Load this data from the title screen to start the game from the beginning. Be careful not to accidentally overwrite data. I don't know. I guess I'll make it 50. Normal new game. Whew. Finn. Finished. Finny. The world there actually looks like it's quite beautiful and hospitable. I wonder why they're living in the crater if it's that nice out in the world. Like, surely they could figure out how to build stuff. Like, I know they've lost a lot of technology, but just the basics of building, like building a house, cutting down a tree with a sharp object, like that should be pretty basic, right? An explanation of the story. Yeah. Let's bring that up. All right. I'll bring it up full screen in a second. Try ice. And don't worry about the bot. It's sentimental. Or I should say touchy, not sentimental. See, it wasn't until like maybe a third the way through the game to half the way through the game where I realized that this fight, I think it was at one point I'm like, that guy kind of looks like a quarter of the way into the game, like the guy in the intro looks a lot like Zephyr, doesn't it? Yeah, imagine that. It's because it is Zephyr. I do like this intro. This is pretty classy. And this is this scene right here, because this is the first thing you see when you start the game. This is why I think that there should be full-on crazy, like DBZ on, well, scaled back from DBZ, but slightly DBZ, early DBZ maybe-esque combat, right? Because of how this fight here is shown. I think it's because he's in that outfit that I didn't recognize him. He looks like one of those thugs. I should have recognized from the scream though. That's definitely Teen Titans Robin screaming. I love this moment right here with the glass. See, look, he does a kick to his face, and then dodges, kicks, and then right here, like with the toss of the gun, and he's just like right into the wall. The only time there's ever ammo that you have to worry about in the game, really, is this cutscene. Love it. Yeah, see, and then boom. You're right, now that you mention it, I do remember that red dot now. Oh, that was on a pillar, not on the main statue, but it must have been. All right. Residents of Page. I'm curious what we would get if we started with that, but let's not worry about that for now. In order for me to show you that screen, I need to bring the game down so I can have it. Here we go. Oh, I wish I could turn this down. Okay. I remember picking up. Okay, can someone summarize the plot of Resonance of Fate? I remember picking it up a while ago, and while the gameplay was interesting, it totally wasn't the type of game one could pick up and play after a long time not playing it. I remember the battle system being so convoluted that you pretty much have to learn from the beginning, at least for me. As for right now, I'm stuck in a spot between being too far for me to want to start over, but too far for me to possibly understand the plot as it is. I remember the plot being weird, very weird. I know the basic premise of mankind living in a tower and the three protagonists being problem solvers for hire. But after that, it gets hazy, really hazy. The narrative is weird. The characters, other than the three well done main characters, are either really obfuscating, really weird, or I don't know. I remember the plot not picking up until after forever as well. Every plot summary I read is a confusing mess as well. Does anyone remember anything about the storyline to this game? Does it ever make sense? Does anyone want to talk about it? All right, now we get the details. Now, I thought there was some things that confused me, the way it was structured. Like, they tell you that bit about Leanne only having 1 year to live. And then, after that cutscene, when all of a sudden she's sick, you have to go get her medicine. So I think it made it seem like it's been 1 year now. Right? They don't explain how they survived the fall, which I would have liked that explained. But so I thought it was like more than this game. I thought the gameplay took more than a year. But it seems like the whole thing from the story that you get at the beginning to like the little cutscene to you beating the game is 2 years. Because I think it said that it was 1 year since Zephyr did the massacre, and then it was 1 year since Leanne tried to kill herself by jumping off chandelier and was caught by Zephyr, even though they fell plummeting and somehow lived. Don't know how, it doesn't matter. Moving on. So I thought it was more than that. I thought it was more like a year and a half, like 2.5, 3 years, rather than just being 2 years. And the gameplay itself, we only play through 1 year. Right? Anyways, let's find out what this says. Someone's going to explain it. Here we go. Let me bring this down here so I have it on my lap. All right. How much time have you got? This stuff is my jam. Satsuma Clementine? Satsuma Clementine. Nice name. I'll try to write it compellingly so it won't be too boring. Thousands of years ago, Earth had become so polluted it became akin to a desolate wasteland. The reason for this is unknown, lost to history. Nuclear war is a possibility. People's the problem. We're living it right now. People built a colossal tower as a gargantuan purifying mechanism, yet it would take a very long time to complete, and things would get worse before they got better. And eventually the tower was the only clean place in the world to live in. Cancer was going through the populace like the plague before someone figured out a way to link human lives to quartz, a mineral which vast deposits existed below Basel. Via the intermediary of the Basel supercomputer Zenith, this healed people of cancer, but the quality of personal piece of quartz now determines their lifespan, the maximum being somewhere around 100 years. As this was similar to a normal human lifespan, it wasn't really an issue unless the person's piece of quartz was to break. Like by putting it on a ring and punching a goblin. Don't do that. That scene broke my heart. I finally, like by that point, I went from being kind of disgusted by Chancellor or whatever, Cardinal Pater, to actually really liking Pater. And then they killed him. And he did it on the most heroic way possible, trying to save Leanne on the date. And it was their first date, which he was willing to pay for. But she was like, it wouldn't be a date if you paid me, silly. And like the look on his face when she said that, like he had a moment of pure joy, and then he went and died. So sad. Anyways. All right. All right. As this was okay. It wasn't really an issue unless someone's person was break earlier than it naturally deteriorated. When people's lives were linked to the Basel supercomputer, however, something else was lost as well. People were cut off from the world outside. Basel, not only geographically, but also mentally and spiritually in ways that are left for the player to interpret during the game. Basel was never intended to be a place for people to live in. Its function being a machine that heals the world from pollution. Thus, it isn't really a suitable place for habitation, especially for thousands of years. Being both geographically and spiritually cut off from the outside world, people forgot it exists. When they gaze out from Basel, they don't see the world outside. Who built Basel and for what purpose becomes enshrouded in mystery. And many come to believe Basel was built by God himself as a haven for his people. Because the builders of Basel are long gone, no one in current times knows what Basel is even for, or how to maintain or fix it. It thus deteriorates in a rapid pace. Many areas malfunctioning entirely, the lower levels deteriorating faster than the upper levels. Yet when Basel was built, it was also known it would take a very long time to purify the world, and thus it was intended to operate autonomously for thousands of years without need of human input. Looked over internally or externally by the supercomputer Zenith, and thus the gears keep moving. People live among its tiers, now none the wiser, as knowledge of what existed before Basel slips even further from consciousness. Some traditions remain, such as Christmas, though its link to Christianity is lost. 20 years ago, Freda was the prelate of Basel with Cardinal Rowan as her right-hand man. She reunited Basel under her will to free its people from suffering. It was the first time of hope and peace, and Rowan especially was enamored with her, possibly being her lover. He was in love with her 100%. Whether or not they were a thing together, I doubt, to be honest. In his mind, probably, but I don't think in her mind. Anyways, that's just me personally. However, as the lower level people dug deeper into the Basil's base in search of rubies, used as currency in Basel, and other riches, they come across a quartz vein and, not understanding its purpose, dug further. Unprecedented cases of spontaneous instant death syndrome happened all around Basel as the miners dug through the quartz deposits. Unable to explain the phenomenon, people turned to religion, believing the spontaneous death to be a message from God. People became hyper-religious. Yet it seemed God would not answer their prayers, and eventually Freda herself succumbed to the spontaneous instant death syndrome, her body becoming entombed in basilica. Sullivan and Urus were two men who lived in the lower levels of Basel. Unlike most people, they studied the tower, trying to discern its purpose. Sullivan especially was a genius in this regard. Some people say that if you could reverse engineer Basel, you could perform miracles. The duo's expertise on Basel sent them flying through the ranks, and in a rare case of upward mobility in Basel, they came to work in Chandelier. After Freda died, Sullivan showed Rowan, who was the next in line to be the prelate, Zenith at the top of Basel, and explained the reason Freda and the other victims had died. Rowan was crestfallen. Oh, actually, sorry, no. I don't think he did explain it fully at that point. Maybe the link to the court, maybe enough to get him to do the experiments and that, but I don't think it was 100% explained to him at that point, because I think Sullivan was still trying to control things a bit. But enough, right? Like, he knew, at least by the 20 years past, he knew about the quartz and everything. But that's that second intro where he's like, what? A machine has no right being God? Good intros. This machine is, where is it? That it'll explain the reason Freda and the other victims had died. Rowan was crestfallen and his belief in God was shaken. And that's why they cut off mining in all the mines for the quartz. Because it was killing people. Makes sense. Mind you, if they told the people this, it would have helped them understand why they're not going to do it. All right, himself and Freda and all the other people had been devout followers of God, yet this machine is the one that coldly decides the time a man's time is up. This machine is what people had been praying to for respite from the death plague. Rowan wanted to believe there being something more to life, some higher power, and that there really is a God who looks after people with a bigger plan. But this revelation shattered it. Though Rowan never took up the rank of prelate, he became Basil's de facto ruler. As a first order of business, he banned all mining expeditions, and the miners who knew about the quartz vein were given massive sums of hush money. The miners took the rare chance at upward mobility in society and moved out of the lower levels, never to be seen again by their previous peers. The lower level inhabitants were furious as to them. It seemed Chandelier had just denied them their main source of income out of seemingly no other reason than to keep them poor. As the mining stopped, so did the cases of spontaneous death. All you had to do is give them a reason why, and the rebellion would never have happened. Because of that, this is why the rebellion happened. The unity Freda had cultivated between cardinals was lost. Each cardinal had their own idea on how to better Basel and started working on their private projects. Cardinal Therese is the most down-to-earth cardinal who wants to help the people through charity and organizes events like soup kitchens in the lower levels and gift-giving to all children in Christmas. Cardinal Inthurian retreated from society and buries himself in research. His goal to find an answer to mankind's predicament this way. Cardinal Garliano lost touch with the people suffering and dedicated his life in creating art to find meaning this way. What about Rowan, the leader of Basel, who lost his faith? He wants to honor Freda's wish to free the people from suffering and thus wants to gain the means of controlling Zenith, though he has largely lost his faith. There is a piece in the scriptures that keeps nagging at him, resurrection. Could Freda come back? If they found a way to control Zenith... I'm sorry, the whole thing about resurrection wasn't Rowan's nugget. That was Sullivan was all, like, hard on about the resurrection. It wasn't until Sullivan told Rowan that was like, no, this is bad, we can't. And that really messed him up. I think that's why Rowan and Sullivan ended up splitting ways, is because Rowan did not want resurrection to be going on, it seemed like. Which you think you'd want the prelate back, but maybe it's because it's too long to have the prelate back. I don't know. Anyways, he doesn't dare believe it. Rowan was never a scientist, however. But what about those Sullivan and Urus? Wanting to study how human lives are linked to quartz, Sullivan and Urus set up a secret experiment in Alderside, high up in Chandelier, with financing from Rowan. Sullivan had figured out a way to locate specific pieces of quartz based on the individual's date of birth. 20 orphans born on Christmas Day were taken to the facility, and the pieces of quartz were programmed to shatter at predetermined dates, one a year. Urus was the one who looked after the children. Every Christmas, one kid moved out of the facility, or was told to the ones who remained. Leanne is experiment number 20. She eagerly awaited the day she would be released from the facility and planned for all the things she would do once the day arrived. Every Christmas, she wished she would be chosen to leave. One day, Leanne got ill and was on the verge of death. Sullivan came to see her and determined she was not well off. Subject number 20, dying early, could mess up the experiment. He ordered the scientists at the lab to do whatever they could to save her. A scientist placed something in Leanne's hand. She recovered. I don't remember that part. Cardinal Lagerfeld is a strict man of religion. He wants to follow the late prelate's ideals of freeing mankind from suffering by the strict following of the scriptures. It was easy to find followers to this more fundamental side of thinking in the wake of the spontaneous instant death syndrome. SIDS. We're just going to call it SIDS. As people were terrified and desperately turned to God, he set up the Crank Seminary, where orphans would be raised as devout followers of God to become the role models of everyone in Basel in due time. And in time, everyone would follow the scriptures to the T, and mankind would be saved, and God would finally listen and save the world. Not everyone was as optimistic, however. The lower-level inhabitants, still sour over Chandelier's banning of the mining, viewed it as yet another scheme for Chandelier to oppress people. What nobody knew was that the people who lived in Basel are not the only people in the world. Long ago, when the first people moved to Basel and became linked to Zenith via the intermediary of quartz, there were people who were left outside. Most died, but some mutated, entering the second stage of evolution. They became immune to cancer, and their cell regeneration became so good they could live exceptionally long lives, and perhaps even became biologically immortal. The young Vacheron was in the army serving under General Victor, Cardinal Teresa's husband. One day there was a disaster, and Lucia and Victor and his men were sent to deal with it, without anyone telling them what to expect. General Gelsey was upset Victor had chosen to lead the mission and not him, and developing a grudge against the Cardinals, especially when the truth of the happenings at Lucia was never released to the public. All that is known is that everyone died but one man, Vacheron. What Victor and Vacheron and the others had met in Lucia was Rebecca. That was her name. A mysterious girl with incredible powers who hated Basel and everything it stood for, and had attacked the town of Lucia. Vacheron was the last man standing, and as Rebecca tried to kill him, something unexpected happened. As she thrust her hand through Vacheron's chest, a mysterious sign knocked her out cold. Vacheron escaped the incident unharmed, with a shocked Sullivan following the events from the shadows. While Vacheron went home and quit the army to become a hunter, unable to make sense of what happened, seeing that he didn't believe in God or miracles, Sullivan secretly took Rebecca home with him. So it was the same one. Okay, I wasn't sure if it was like the same or a little girl, because she used to talk and then she stopped talking. So I thought like maybe the one that Sullivan kept was like her daughter or something. I don't know. Or another one he found. Because she also seemed younger when Sullivan had her. But that's probably because of her not talking and acting very childish. So maybe when she killed Vacheron and Zenith did its thing and kept him alive, like there's that sacred seal. I think it was on his gun. Maybe that's what messed her up. Actually, no, she killed him and it like happened on her chest, I think. Didn't it? I could have swore it appeared on her chest in the cutscene. We'll keep going anyways. Knocked out cold, escaped the incident, became a hunter, unable to make sense of what happened. Sullivan secretly took Rebecca home with him and had the incident covered up. After all, with Vacheron as the only eyewitness, keeping one man silent was not too difficult, a task seeing Vacheron didn't want anything to do with the whole thing. Sullivan realized Rebecca is from outside Basel and thus a true man of God, as she is free of Zenith. The contact with the sacred sign had made Rebecca mentally retarded and mostly harmless. Sullivan let her drink his blood and studies her in secret, and thus started the second strain of research into Zenith's workings, one best-kept secret from Rowan. Sullivan realized Rebecca's cell regeneration is so good she is practically immortal, and throughout the years she stays with him, she never seems to age. Subject number 19 moved out of Alderside, and only Leanne remained. That moved out means dead. During a tea break with Urus, she lamented still having to wait a year before her turn. Urus suddenly declared she can leave today and hurried her to the gates. Leanne was excited and promised to come meet him on her next birthday. They ran into Rowan, and Leanne wished him a Merry Christmas. Rowan was furious Urus was going to release Leanne early, but Urus pleaded they had enough data and that Leanne should be allowed to live the last year of her life. Remembering words from Frida of how she wanted to give people freedom, Rowan relented and Leanne was shoved out the door in the hassle. She had stolen Urus's notebook. That's because she was kind of left on the ground with it. Urus's notebook. Bewildered, Urus had called it the last year of her life. She read it. Discovered the other subjects had not moved out. They had all died. And her time would come in exactly 1 year. Zephyr was an orphan living in the Crank seminary, but things were not going well with him. He did not fit in with the oppressing brainwashing atmosphere and struggled to believe in an all-knowing, benevolent God, seeing how much suffering there was in the world. He clashed with Lagerfeld for not being devout enough. He had befriended a younger girl who tried to make Zephyr a devout and teach him about God by giving him a book. But Zephyr never even opened the book of scriptures she had given him, and one day he snapped. He brought a gun to school, and the most horrific school shooting event in Basil's history took place. And if God is all-powerful, surely God would stop him. Or if God let him kill his classmates, then this was part of God's big plan. Zephyr defied the teachings and asked for God to intervene and show he really exists, but alas, no divine intervention came to stop him. Except for when Vacheron showed up to stop Zephyr, beats him up, puts a gun in his mouth, pulls the trigger twice, and he doesn't die. That seemed like a miracle to save him. And that messed up Lagerfeld or whatever. Vacheron had become a legend among the Cardinals, being the only survivor of the Lucia incident, and thus he is privy to some exclusive jobs with the Cardinals and other hunters rarely get a chance at. Lagerfeld hired him to kill Zephyr, who remained in a manic state at the Crank seminary after having shot his classmates. Vacheron overpowered Zephyr in a gunfight and shot him twice in the head, but he didn't die. The sacred sign appeared on the statue of God Vacheron had pinned Zephyr's head against. Vacheron recognized it as the same thing as what had happened to him and refused to try and kill Zephyr again, despite Lagerfeld's insistence. Vacheron took Zephyr to Ebel City to live with him, while Lagerfeld must accept that for an unfathomable reason God had saved Zephyr with a divine miracle. The Crank Seminary project was dropped, people coming up with various interpretations of what happened. Some believed a boy was possessed by the devil, but some lower-level inhabitants hailed him as a hero and started a cult around him. Viewing him as a role model who fought Chandelier's oppression, Vacheron gained even more notoriety as the hunter who killed the boy possessed by the devil. Vacheron and Zephyr lived for a year in Ebel City, Vacheron giving him a room in the attic. Although Zephyr had no belongings other than the book of scriptures he still refuses to open, it never throws away. Neither can make sense of what happened to them, but try to make the best of it. Though Zephyr battles depression, he has suicidal thoughts, but fears he would be unable to die if he tried, and thus never tries to commit suicide. He feels he has little reason to live, however, and not being afraid of death makes him put his life in harm's way easily. This trait came to use on Christmas Day a year after moving in with Vacheron. Christmas Day, her 20th birthday, the day she was to die, Leanne went to the top of Chandelier, her plan to commit suicide to have the last shred of agency in declaring her fate. She jumped. See, it seemed to me like that was the day she left. Like she wasn't going to wait a year anymore. If she was going to die, she was going to do it in her way and then jump. And that's why it being another year, the game taking place another year kind of lines up again. So I think this is actually on her 19th birthday, having found out that she was supposed to die in 1 year and reading the journal and her life being a lie, she decided she was going to die her way and have control that way. Leanne went to the top of Chandelier to plan Her plan to commit suicide to have the last shred of agency in Silent Fate. She jumped, but Zephyr caught her midair and both fell off the edge. Bells tolled to midnight. The light of Zenith flashed with the symbol of the sacred sign at the top of the basilica, and Leanne didn't die. Was there a sacred sign at the top? I don't remember that, but it's been like 80 hours of gameplay in several weeks, so I think like it's been a month. Took us a month to play this, only playing it on weekends. Mind you, I play it in 12-hour stretches normally. All right. I wonder if the people saved by Zenith, if they just live here, like even if their quartz dies, do they still live? Maybe, like maybe they're that kind of like it breaks them from the quartz. I don't know. The bell tolls. Okay, the lights of Zenith flashed with the symbol of the sacred sign at the top of the basilica. Leanne didn't die. Later, Zephyr reminisces he saw a strange symbol on the ground where they fell. Zephyr took Leanne to Ebel City to live with them and join their hunter group. I wonder if there was a spot where you could go in the game where you could see the red dot on the ground, and that's where they landed. Sullivan is selling out people's pieces of quartz behind Rowan's back to fund his secret research into Rebecca, and has Vacheron deliver them. Only someone wealthy like a cardinal can afford it. After Vacheron collects Cardinal Pater's quartz from the abandoned cafe Chelsea, Sullivan lets Rebecca play in the ruins. She grasps something invisible from the air while Sullivan watches. He is holding another piece of quartz in his hands. Okay, that makes so much more sense. I remember that scene. She's seeing the outside world and the snow falling and all that. But because of for whatever reason, because of their connection to Zenith and Basil, it's keeping them from seeing the outside world to keep them inside it, probably to keep them protected. Okay. This is such a cool world. I love this backstory. I like the whole the world and the story of the game is pretty fun. It's interesting. All right, he is holding another piece of quartz in his hand. Vacheron, Zephyr, and Leanne deliver the piece of quartz to Pater. What they don't mention him holding the quartz in his hand, that's after he pointedly stares at Leanne for a bit. So that must have been her quartz right then. Vacheron, Zephyr, and Leanne deliver the piece of quartz to Pater. Pater's father has recently passed away and was the one keen on finding his son's piece, so he probably knew about its significance. Pater, having inherited the rank of cardinal, only associates it with the story of finding one star from heavens, bringing one eternal good luck. As he turns the quartz into a light, his eyes shine blue, proving the piece is his. Pater takes a liking to Leanne and starts hanging out at Ebel City, but is always too shy to talk to her, although he befriends Zephyr. Pater's idea on how to improve the populace's lives is to rebuild Patertopolis that collapsed during the instant spontaneous death syndrome epidemic. He is part of the new generation of cardinals alongside Cardinal Jean Paulet, Cardinal Buarella, and Cardinal Veronique, who never served under Frida. Jean Paulet is happy being the Justin Bieber of Basel, who, while greatly loved as an idol, is out of touch with the people's struggles and thinks he can help by commissioning an ugly statue to be placed in the Force of Idols as a symbol of hope to people. I don't think it was supposed to be an ugly statue, was it? And people ended up thinking it was ugly, but it was a statue of Leanne, but in a stupid pose. Veronica is the only truly religious cardinal, her faith through the true God unshaken. She spends long days praying for Rowan, who has become clinically depressed and an alcoholic. Rowan mourns the deaths of the 20 orphans, the experiment he had funded, and drowns his sorrow with the bottle and rarely appears in public. On Prelate Freda Day, Teresa takes Vacheron tasks Vacheron with delivering a silk rose to Lucia to where Victor and the other men died. She is shocked to see Zephyr with Vacheron, and to hear Zephyr had saved Leanne. During a blackout, Vacheron's team fixes a power generator to get more work from the other cardinals and climb the social ladder. Vacheron dresses Leanne up to inspire Garliano to create a statue of her, which is later commissioned by Jean Paulet to be put on display to raise the morale of the poor, although everyone ends up thinking the statue is hideous. While they're lowering the statue to the Force of Idols, they spot flower petals flying in the air. Leanne ponders where they come from, and Vacheron reminds her there is a world outside Basel. Leanne gets ill and hallucinates of the time she was ill in Alderside with when a scientist saved her by putting something in her hand. and of the time she left the facility, but Zephyr and Vacheron deliver her medicine. See, that's why at that point I thought it was the 1 year, right? Because they just done the whole she's got a year to live scene, and then she gets sick. It's like, oh, it's been a year. We got to save her. But it's not, apparently. I wonder if the reason all three of them can see the outside world and can see the stuff flying, the snow falling, is because they had the sacred sign. It's only the people that had the sacred sign on them. I think that means their connection to Zenith being their quartz is broken, and that's why they didn't die. Maybe like they're actually got it. They're like, that's got to be the connection, right? Anyways, where were we? Gelsey, the army officer holding a grudge over the Cardinals having chosen Victor over him, breaks into the quartz mines to find out what the Cardinals are hiding there. Wanting to keep the area a secret from general public, Sullivan sends Vacheron's group to deal with it instead of the army. After Gelsey's killed, Sullivan arrives and is shocked Leanne is with Vacheron. But Leanne doesn't recognize Sullivan because it was Urus who looked after the orphans. Sullivan is dumbfounded Leanne is not dead and asks Vacheron to take good care of her. Which is weird because he had already seen her at that point. Because the scene when you go, one of the very first missions, you go to that Cafe Kelsey or whatever, and you get the quartz from Sullivan to give to Pater. He looked at her while holding a quartz in his hand. He did seem surprised on that, so maybe it's not 100% perfect, right? Where Sullivan eventually proceeds. Where? I'm lost my spot. Oh, take good care of her. Okay. So we're up to here. We're now done. This poses a problem for Sullivan, however. Were Rowan to discover Leanne is alive, he would discover Zenith cannot be controlled and would think the experiment with the 20 orphans was in vain. Jeopardizing Sullivan's coveted position, Sullivan expedites the project and asks Rowan to provide something to work as the key to control Zenith. And Rowan gives his ring, given to him by Frida. Sullivan knows Rowan views him as expendable and that if he really got the means to control Zenith, he would get rid of Sullivan, no longer needing him and now viewing him a threat for the inside knowledge he has. Sullivan eventually procures the ring and tells Rowan he can control Zenith and provokes him by talking about resurrection, claiming it is possible. See, that's when Rowan even heard about resurrection, and it pissed him off. He did not like the idea. Sullivan needs to keep manipulating Rowan so he would believe controlling Zenith is the only way to reach his goals, whereas Sullivan knows otherwise with his secret research with Rebecca. Sullivan had told Rowan before that it would be imperative for the two of them to locate their personal piece of quartz and keep them safe. Pater summons the courage to ask Leanne out for a date, but during it, his piece of quartz he now always holds on his person shatters and he dies. He wears it as a ring, and it's like a big, like the quartz is like kind of like those ring pop things that you could suck on. It was that big, and he punches a gremlin thing with it, and instantly died. Pater shatters and dies. Pater project is abandoned. Cardinal Inturian tasks Vacheron to look for the sacred sign from Lucia, as his research has led him to believe it was the thing that saved Vacheron that day. Despite Vacheron insisting he didn't see a sign, Vacheron's party discovers Vacheron's old gun, but not much else. The sight of it triggers a flashback where Vacheron remembers confronting Rebecca and remembers the sign appeared on her when she thrust her hand through his chest. He starts to laugh, realizing it is impossible to find the sign if it was on Rebecca. But what is he supposed to tell Inturian? Okay, so it was on her. I thought maybe it was the gun, but yeah, no, it was her. I remembered. Okay, on the day of the school shooting, Vacheron delivers a flower to Crank Seminary, and Leanne accompanies him on the day of its anniversary, 1 year after it, I think was the date. Or maybe at this point, it's 2 years, because this was right around Christmas. So maybe like 2 years, because he lived with Vash for a year, and then Leanne joined for most of the year. All right. Leanne accompanies him, discovering Zephyr was the culprit, greatly upsetting her. Lagerfeld, who hasn't had much meaning in his life after the Crank Seminary project fell apart, loses his faith in God and decides to settle the matters and kill Zephyr. He calls Zephyr out to the rainy bridge, and during their confrontation reveals that if Zephyr had even tried it and given God a chance and opened the book of scripture, he would have learned he had a sister, the girl that gave him the book. Zephyr gives up, but Leanne shoots Lagerfeld and admonishes Zephyr for being willing to die so easily. Ever since saving Leanne, Zephyr had made her his reason for living, but can't shake the suicidal thoughts, unable to understand why he is still alive when all the people around them are dying, him surely being the least deserving of anyone. Zephyr opens up to Vacheron of his plan to commit suicide once he's made sure Leanne will be happy. Jean-Paul gets married in secret, hiding Zephyr and Leanne as hiring them as decoys for a fake wedding while Paulet's bride's ex-boyfriend hires Vacheron to stop it. Hilarity ensues. Christmas is coming in, and Peter was meant to be this year's Santa, but seeing he passed away, Teresa asked Vacheron's party, knowing Peter had taken a liking to Leanne, and would probably be happy if she took up the role in his stead. After the gift-giving, Teresa invites the three to the Mass in Basilica, where Leanne passes by Rowan and wishes him Merry Christmas, mirroring the event from 2 years ago. Rowan recognizes Leanne as Subject 20 and is shocked. Either Sullivan has been lying to him about the experiment with the 20 orphans and gaining control of Zenith, or a miracle has happened and resurrection is real. He sets out to confront Sullivan and sends his men to raid Alderside, but Sullivan is one step ahead. He tells Urus to leave, but the latter refuses, not seeing the point as he doesn't have much to live for now that the experiment is over. Rowan's men ransack Alderside, but as they can't find Sullivan, they depart. Kill a lot of people, though. Meaning Rowan has reminded Leanne of Urus and her childhood and how she promised to see him on her birthday, and departs to Alderside, where she meets Urus, and he comes back to Ebel City with her. He is shocked Leanne is alive, but cannot explain how. He theorizes Leanne's piece of quartz was swapped by Sullivan, though he cannot fathom why Sullivan would do that. Zephyr is upset Leanne's quartz is in the hands of some mad scientist and urges them to go confront him. This part seems odd to me, because we get there and there's a cutscene of Sullivan giving a quartz to Rebecca Riddle, like that demon girl or whatever, and she flies off with it. And he's like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting you people here." But if he wasn't expecting us, he wouldn't have had to hide the quartz. He just would have had to been like, "It's somebody else's quartz," right? Like, just keep it out of sight so the guy doesn't find it. Period. Sullivan is at his residence at the outer wall of Chandelier, and he releases Rebecca to the wild. He gives her a piece of quartz and tells her to destroy it if he fails to join her in time. As Rebecca leaves, Vacheron's party shows up, demanding for Leanne's quartz, but Sullivan claims he has organized to have it destroyed should something happen to him. Rowan, who also pursues Sullivan, arrives and overhears. He demands to know why Subject 20 is standing before them and alive and well. Sullivan claims miracles are part of the system. Leanne's survival doesn't mean the experiment was futile. Rowan demands to see a miracle with his own eyes so that he can believe in God and shoot Sullivan. Vacheron confirms he is dead. With Sullivan dead, Leanne should die soon after. In Rowan's mind, if she does not die, surely Leanne is immortal and God's chosen. Fighting through Rowan's ranks, the party flees. Leanne wants to talk to Rowan one last time. She has accepted her impending death. Her wish came true after all, to live her life like she wanted. She deems the year she had was enough. Before she dies, she wants to ask Rowan something. Zephyr is beside himself as Leanne is his only reason for living. Also, he's kind of fallen in love with her by this point, too. Cardinal Anturian and Garliano defend Rowan as per their promise made to Frida, but fall to the party. They meet Rowan in Basilica, and Leanne is asked asks Rowan if he regrets anything. Rowan doesn't, and Leanne is satisfied. Zephyr isn't, and he draws his gun and shoots Rowan. The bullet passes through his body and into the painting of Frida at the back that begins to shine with the sacred sign. Zephyr is infuriated, but Vacheron leads his team out, and they again ponder about there being a world outside Basel. Rowan has had the proof of a miracle he was looking for, and his faith in the true God, not Zenith, is restored. He leaves the ring on Frida's tomb to signify he has given up on trying to control Zenith. Whether the appearance of the sacred sign that saves a person from assured death is just a glitch in Zenith's programming or a real miracle no longer matters to him. Inturian Garliano also rise, the symbol of the sacred sign burning under their bodies as flower petals rain all around Basel. Cardinal Veronique, who had been praying, spotting them as well as Urus back in Able City. But this is after Rebecca broke the quartz that was given to her. If that was the quartz that was for Leanne, but she had already survived through the sacred seal thing, I'm guessing that's why it kind of gave everyone in the city a way out. Like, otherwise no one else, only people who had the seal could see, and Veronique never died and never had a seal. So her seeing the snow in the outside world wouldn't have fit. But it does seem like the story said, like, after the whole city got to see the outside world, I think it's because the Leanne's crystal broke. All right. Colonel Veronica, who had been praying, spotting them as well as Urus back in Apple City. Outside Basel, Rebecca waits for Sullivan, who never shows and thus destroys the quartz in her possession. See, I think those were in different. She destroys it before all those people get back up. Sullivan finds her and sees the flower petals swirling in the air. He realizes the petals were what Rebecca was grasping when she was playing in the abandoned cafe Chelsea during the time they delivered Peter's quartz to Vacheron, and says, "Now I see what you see." Rebecca, who has been unable to speak ever since that incident with the sacred sign, mutters the word Sullivan and embraces him. Further outside Basel, in a world purified of pollution, Vacheron, Zephyr, and Leanne explore the land. Leanne raises her hand to the sun, and a blue stone shines through it, and her eyes turn blue, like Peter's did when he confirmed the veracity of his piece of quartz. The unknown scientist had put Leanne's piece in her hand, literally putting her life in her own hands, and the piece Sullivan had was never hers. Okay. I was wondering if it's just that, not that she's quartz bound anymore. Her eyes glowing and having quartz is the only thing I thought didn't really fit. I would have liked it better that her star was literally the sun, and she was now bound to the world, right? Rather than she's bound to a quartz that's embedded in her hand. Not that it really matters, because even then her quartz was still supposed to break at that time, and it never broke. But maybe having your own quartz inside your body makes you immortal. Who knows? This is okay. Satsuma Clementine's fan theory on the ending. The piece of quartz Sullivan had since the beginning was his own. When he told Rowan they should work to find their own pieces of quartz, he had already located his own a long time ago. Sullivan had reversed its effects. He knew he could not leave Basel because he couldn't see the outside world, being linked to Zenith. Therefore, he arranged to have himself killed. When Rebecca destroyed the piece of quartz, it revived him and freed him, and all the other people of Basel alongside him from Zenith. That's why people in the ending can see the flower petals. People leave Basel and discover the world had been restored. The name Rebecca means connection, and when she embraces Sullivan in the ruins outside Basel, the two strands of mankind are reunited. Sullivan is the second coming of Jesus, either literally or allegorically. Rebecca drinking his blood alludes to the communion ritual. Him dying and being resurrected frees the people of Basel from Zenith. Whether God really exists is up for the players. I don't like that. I don't like Sullivan being an allegory for Jesus. I'm okay with that being his crystal. But like, why would his crystal be any different than any other crystal? And why would breaking it serve differently, right? Because it's not like you can just reverse a crystal and make it so that it now frees everybody. Like, he didn't know enough on the system on that. He was still viewing Zenith through the lens of scripture and as like a stand-in for like a man-made god, a machine god. So I don't think he could have done that. I like my idea of it being a crystal of someone. I would see that him more being it's Rowan's crystal, Rowan's quartz, who was the leader and had control of Basel through the ring. So if it's his quartz, it's like if I don't come break it, because that way he knows he'd get his revenge on the guy who killed him, right? Plus, I think breaking the quartz of someone who's been saved by the sacred seal is what freed the city. But if it was Rowan, because he survived through the shot, right? He had the sacred seal before the thing was broken, and he's in control of Zenith. So maybe his quartz became like the master quartz because he's now in control of Zenith, breaking the master quartz, breaking the master contract. Zenith's no longer in control. I can see that as a reason why it frees everything a lot better than the Sullivan idea. But Rebecca and him coming together and showing the link of both sides of mankind being reunited, that I dig. I just don't like him being an allegory for Jesus. How do you suss all this out? Are you a big fan of the plot? I feel like even if I was, I'd have taken notes to retain all the information. I had most of it pretty close, I think. It's their favorite game. Me and my husband have unlocked so many hard modes. The gift giving mission becomes a drag as the kid gains resistance to being gifted. That makes sense, huh? Every time you complete it, you just get a new, even harder mode. And there's 10 harder modes. All right, here's someone else's Nyarla Topep? Whatever. Okay, interesting. I never made the correlation that Sullivan might actually be an allusion to Jesus. But looking back, everything does seem to point towards that idea. There is enough there that you can totally see it, to be honest. I don't like it. I always assumed that Rebecca drinking his blood simply meant that the humans outside developed vampiric traits in order to survive, and while they may still be the case, the Messiah angle would certainly give it an added layer of meaning. See, I looked at her as like a demon, kind of succubus, kind of. Wow, another want to be famous, and I looked at her as either like a succubus or a vampire type thing. I didn't see her as human at all. It's been a long time since I played the game, but overall, your take on the story seems to line up with my own. I don't recall Zephyr mentioning that he intended to commit suicide after injury. No, he definitely did. He definitely did. Wasn't there some sort of implication that Sullivan had used the Crank Seminary orphans as guinea pigs in order to experiment with Rebecca's cells with it in turn being what caused Zephyr to have a psychotic outburst? Maybe that was just a fan theory I read somewhere or something, but it would explain why he acts like a feral animal in the game's opening cinematic. Was it ever explained what Rebecca meant when she called Vacheron one of Zenith's knights? The Knights of Zenith are the people that it raises with the sacred sign, I bet. See, I was wondering about that too. It seemed like one of the scenes alluded to the orphans from the Crank Seminary being the subjects of the experiment, the 20. Because I thought there was something about there being like 20. The one guy was constantly adding more and more of the tombstones or whatever, right? I thought that, but then I didn't make the connection because it didn't seem to line up right. So I dropped it. I think it's after Vacheron and Leanne visit the Crank Seminary that Vacheron and Zephyr talk on the sweet home rooftop. Zephyr says, I want Leanne to be happy. Oh, that's just saying about when he suicide thing. There's nothing in the game about Crank Seminary experiments on the kids there, but I have also heard that there would have been something along those lines in a Japanese guidebook. I really won't know anything about that. Could be cut content. I don't know. I had that thought when they made there was things said that made me connect the two, thinking that was the case. But that was like 2 streams ago. Rebecca says, so one of Zenith's knights still lives when Vacheron is the last one of his army regiment to be left standing. So maybe it just refers to the position as soldier. Nothing further is given in any case. Could be more plot lines. Perhaps his bloodline could be special in some manner. But I also like the idea that Sacred Sign would be random. No, I don't want their Sacred Sign to be random. I like the idea of the reason why he's a Knight of Zenith is why he lived. Rebecca drinking blood could well be that people on the outside survive by consuming others, and vampiric traits would allude to the not aging thing. Sullivan wants to become like her, so I hope he won't have to do the same blood drinking. Maybe Rebecca could only eat food from outside. Basil and Sullivan had just come up with something on the fly for an in-game explanation. During my further playthroughs, I've been thinking about the day and night cycle in the game. For story reasons, the time sometimes stands still. It's for gameplay reasons, but NPCs still comment on the day and nights seeming to last forever. Basil controls the rotation of the actual Earth. Then that's quite an engineering marvel from the people of the past. Or maybe they're not always living what you think. Like maybe sometimes they're kind of like paused. It's all pretty vague. I think they did gain control over Zenith and freed the people from this quartz system. And shattering the quartz is simply showing that it doesn't have any control over the lives anymore. Oh, I definitely think Zenith is they definitely got broken from the quartz, I believe. It showed the other people seeing the stuff, the outside world, and the snow falling in that. It's just like, why would that happen? I don't think it would just be because of Sullivan's quartz. I like the idea that the guy with the master control key, the ring, Rowan, the one that now in charge of Zenith, his quartz being like the master contract thing, and if you break his quartz, you're breaking all the contracts. But he died and was resurrected before that happened, right? So maybe it's. I'd also like to think like if that's the case, then why would quartz breaking be different for some people? Maybe it's because of them being the ones that were resurrected by the sacred seal, right? Like I like. There feels like there should be a connection there. Uh, Curious if there's more information with the game world, lore, characters, and stories that only ever revealed in untranslated Japanese materials. It does seem like a lot of things were left very vague. Yeah. There were a short prequel manga, but much like the game itself, it simply covers another day in the life of the protagonist. Regardless, despite a lot of the details being only overly vague, I think the three protagonists were where the game really shines. They have such excellent chemistry. Yeah. Actually playing the game again sometime. I want to play PS3, okay. Bonus shots for those chips all the way. I have the HD version for PS4, and the subtitles do not say stay off. Every time you start up the game, they are on again. What a weird new bug to introduce, but it's still as good as ever. I had issues with, at first, it not remembering the settings to stay full screen and stuff. Resonance of Fate sure is a lot easier when you go in already having a general idea of the mechanics and how to do things. I remember having so much trouble the first time I played. The only thing I never got to really work was that triple attack thing. I never got that to work. I only ever did 2 that sort of worked, and only 2 people attacked when I did that because at the time the 2 people were really close. So it went Vacheron, Leanne, Zephyr, Zephyr, Leanne, Vacheron, and Vacheron had like that far to go. By the time it was his turn, he had already ran his part of the triangle. I never got it to work right. Oh, updated thoughts. Haven't finished the HD version yet, mainly because I'm slowly working towards the awful Stardust Hunters achievement as I go along, but I've just completed chapter 11 or so. Okay. Allegedly, the information about Zephyr being one of Sullivan's experiments is only detailed in a Japan-exclusive design book. Of course, I have no means of actually confirming that for myself. However, I'm inclined to believe that it's true. Partially since Zephyr seems to be portrayed as someone you're meant to sympathize with, but that would border on impossible unless he truly wasn't all there mentally when he went off on his murder spree. We see him at the beginning. He's completely out of his mind, and he's not out of his mind the rest of the time. As mentioned before, I would explain his feral state during the intro cinematic, as well as why his vision starts to get all wobbly right before he shoots his sister in one of the flashbacks. Furthermore, several NPCs generally believe that he was possessed by the devil, with at least one of them considering him to have been a victim as well because of it. I feel this might be subtly hinting towards the idea that he wasn't fully himself during the incident, not because he was literally possessed, but because experimentation has severe adverse effect on his mental state. I like that fits, and that's also kind of why I started thinking like maybe there's a connection with the seminary and the 20 experiments. Because they did it on 20 orphans. They experimented on 20 orphans, and you have a seminary of orphans. Like, that's a connection. That's definitely a connection. Whether it's a strong enough connection to actually walk on, who knows? Also, them with him not dying and going on to like be a better person and actually try to help things and not be crazy, it could just be like people finding an excuse to move on, right? This will let them accept him not being punished and go on with their lives and put it behind them. So it could be just a coping mechanism, why they call them possessed and all that, taking the responsibility out of his hands. An important detail that I noticed this time around was that there was no mention of the sacred sign appearing when Vacheron seemingly killed Zephyr. And if I recall correctly, there was no sign when Sullivan died either. This makes them the only 2 characters to die whose resurrections are not implied to be the results of Zenith's intervention. Nope. Actually, Zephyr's is on the statue. It's there. Although Sullivan, like Garliano and Arturian, their symbol was where death wound was on the ground. So like they had died and their wound was facing the ground. When they got up where their wound was, that's where their symbol was. But they all had a symbol. This makes the guy think that Sullivan's experimentation was actually successful and that Zephyr is now akin to the humans beyond Basil and has achieved some level of immortality as a result. In turn, I think that Sullivan's resurrection, his claim of now being immortal in the bonus dungeon, is actually not due to him finding a way to reverse the effects of the quartz. Thus far, I have yet to see anything that implies that such a thing would be possible. They do talk about how controlling Zenith would give them control over who lives and dies, but I don't think that would actually let them extend life beyond the quartz's maximum lifespan of 100 years. Instead, I think that he successfully modified himself to also be like Rebecca and the other humans outside of Basil as well, having used the information he gained through the experiments on Zephyr, possibly other orphans from Crankdown Seminary, in order to refine the process. Thus, when the quartz was shattered, it didn't actually matter because he was already free from Zenith at that point. Nah. In fact, that he was able to still resurrect despite this proves to him that he had successfully unbound himself from his quartz. I don't agree with that last bit, but if he was experimenting on himself with her cells, and that's what made Zephyr go mad, the thing is then, like, why would Leanne and Vacheron... Well, Vacheron got stabbed by her, so her cells went into him, so that could be why he gets a sacred mark. So it could be all the people that get resurrected were a connection to her. Because of Rebecca's cells. But would Sullivan had gone around and made sure Garliano, Arturian, and Rowan and as well as himself? Like, I see him getting himself, but Rowan, Arturian, and Garliano? I can't see him going around giving them Rebecca's cells without them knowing. So that doesn't really fit on that side of things. Additionally, there was a scene where Sullivan brings up how cancer is a sort of cellular immortality, how there were attempts to remove its negative effects like aging and death, leaving behind only the positive traits, namely immortality. The NPC warden also makes mention of there supposedly being medical technology in the distant past that could make men immortal. The question is, why bring up these ideas in the first place if they seemingly serve no purpose in the story? This leads me to believe that this is actually hinting towards the idea that humans outside of Basil may have evolved to be immortal, or at least very close to it. It doesn't seem that outside of the realm of possibility when we have Rebecca, an evolved human who has horns, can live off of just blood, and can even manifest ethereal wings in order to fly. Humans outside of Basil clearly aren't anything like they were prior to its construction, and that much is for sure. This is unrelated, but the time around I've been paying much closer attention to NPC dialogue, and I'm glad that I have because I've noticed an interesting piece of lore which actually explains all the weird mutant-looking creatures in the game and why so many dogs and machines are hostile. Neville states that when too much of the black oil is harvested from Basil's gears, it can lead to malfunctions, and that in areas where the purity of the oil has been compromised, there's always reports of machines and animals going berserk. This is supported by Betty, who at one point states that a machine went haywire and hurt her lover because it was doused in black oil. Yep, that was that's fairly early on, actually. The most intriguing part is that Dawson states that black oil has organic properties, almost like an animal. Lorraine mentions that if you leave an oil drum out long enough, that it will turn into a dweller. This seems to apply to vehicles as well, or anything else. The black oil in it, if the jalopy golem is anything to go by. While I'm not exactly sure why it causes a machine to go berserk, it would seem that it causes organic life forms to mutate, evolve at an accelerated rate, as Lorraine's comment seems to imply that creatures that make contact with the black oil eventually turn into dwellers. I'm curious if the more human-looking ones, like the tri-stamp enemies, were the result of people going into contact with the black oil. Last, as far as I can tell, the game doesn't seem to actually get into specifics about the oil. Still, it's interesting to see how many details are hidden. There's a ton of... That's why whenever I came across an NPC, each chapter I talked to him. I was surprised about when I saw one of the NPCs mention how Anturian was actually quite a fearsome warrior in his youth, since it surprised me the first time I played when the old bookworm suddenly whipped out an anti-tank rifle like it was nothing. That did not surprise me. I paid attention. Also, I noticed a cool detail earlier. Normally, Zephyr will say, not really my kind of weapon when switching from machine gun to handguns or grenades. However, during this playthrough, I've been leveling up everyone in all three weapon types a lot, and while swapping from machine gun to handgun instead of Lagerfeld, Zephyr instead said, best to go with what you know, just like Vacheron does when swapping to handguns and grenades, which are preferred weapon types. Machine gun. Handgun is Zephyr's weapon. Zephyr is a dual handgun wielder by story. Anytime you go to handgun, he's always like, best to go with what you know. It's when you go to grenades or the submachine gun that he's like, nah, this ain't my weapon. This has got me wondering if the characters react more positively while and swapping to the weapon types they didn't start with once they've gotten more proficient with them. If so, then that's a really nice little touch. However, I should note that I rarely ever swapped between weapon types during my first playthrough several years back, so it's possible that this is the only reason I've ever heard him say it before. Side note, going back to your comment about the game subtitles. No. Anyway, that's everything. Yay. Okay. I played Resident Evil 8 years ago, enjoyed the combat, but the story was completely indecipherable. I don't think the story is that indecipherable. You do need to pay attention. This makes a bit more sense, but I still don't get why Rowan didn't die when Zephyr shot him. Is the sacred sign meant to mean that God really does exist and all the religion is real or what? Nope. It is meant to be a mystery. Either it is a glitch in Zenith and happens randomly and people pointlessly attach meaning to it, or it is an intended feature of Zenith to start releasing people from it after a certain amount of time, perhaps after it is estimated the world is habitable again. Whoever built Zenith is not around any longer to answer whether the sacred sign feature is intended or it could be of divine origin. Rowan wants to believe it is, and that is good enough for him. Sullivan believes that it is done by Zenith and that miracles are an intended part of the system, and if he can reverse engineer Zenith, then he can gain the power to perform miracles as well. Vacheron and friends seem atheists and don't care about either God or Zenith and seem to take the sacred sign as a random occurrence where they just got lucky. The game's Japanese title, End of Eternity, which sounds like a much better name. Actually, yeah. I think both names fit. But maybe that was already taken in English and they didn't want to use it. I don't know. So I think it's possible that in the ending, Zenith has just come to the end of its program, deemed the world habitable for humans again, and thus released it. I don't think that's the case. I think the reason it got released is her breaking the crystal out there. And if it's Rowan's crystal out there and he's the one in control of Zenith, I think that's like the one in charge of Zenith breaking his crystal makes sense as a trigger for releasing everybody. At least that makes sense in my mind. My crazy little skull. I think the sacred sign signifies one being released from Zenith. When Rebecca plays at Cafe Chelsea and the scene is from Sullivan's point of view, he watches her play with the air. In the first Forest of Idols, the party spots flower petals and are amazed they can see something that is from outside Basel. In the end, everyone sees the petals and Sullivan saying, I see what you see. Yep. There is a lot to this game. Eventually turns to JRP. Before the start of the game, most humanity gets cancer and dies out. To combat this, humanity moves into the tower and turns over management of the lifespans to the supercomputer. Eden, maybe? Names escape me at this point. Zenith. And are basically immortal until the time that the computer... They're not immortal. This is wrong. Computer has calculated it arrives to paraphrase. Human beings are more or less undying except when the computer RNGs their death in the scale. Okay, this person is trying to take a stab, but they're completely wrong. Computer is not... The computer's Zenith. They're not immortal inside the city. They only have about normal lifespan. It's just going to take forever to fix a ruined world. Human beings are more or less undying except when the computer RNGs their death, and then it's all over. Hence, in the intro video, the shootout where nobody dies, they can't. And also relevant to the other intro video with the computer that I never saw until I'd beaten the game. This one sort of links things together. No. Most of the odd job stuff is trivial, not main plot related, and I barely remember most of it except the hilarious mission with the Jigglies and the helicopter ones near the end. The Jigglies. We got a cutscene of that because it is hilarious. Eventually it turns into a classic JRP, we must kill fate type of thing, and becomes your job to break humanity free of the computer. That's not why you do anything. You beat up but can't kill, obviously, the guy who's managing the computer and frees yourself. The game ends with everyone twirling around outside the purified world, outside the tower, free of the shackles of the computer, which was keeping them safe. This guy's trying to remember it has got it way off base. This person thinking it doesn't make sense at all is wrong. The story makes a lot of sense, but there's so much going on, it's very convoluted. The game makes a lot more sense if you watch the second introduction video that plays if you wait on the main menu long enough. Holy shit, I think that was actually the worst decision in this game story-wise, was hiding that video, which explains a huge portion of what's going on between Rowan and Sullivan, and not playing it as the game's intro vid or something seriously. Yeah, I didn't see it for several weeks, then when I saw it, I thought it was like spoilery. I thought that was stuff coming ahead, but no, it's just explaining more what's going on. It does remind me a little bit of Cowboy Bebop. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. That's so worth knowing. Such a good game. Very, very crazy plot. Anyways, guys, that will be it for this week. I'll be back next Friday, Saturday, Sunday again, where I stream 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. because I like games that are longer, so I might as well play a long time. And I'm a little bit crazy if you haven't yet noticed. If you haven't yet clicked the follow button, please do. It means a lot to me. We'll be starting a new RPG next week. I don't know which one yet. I'm leaning between something older or maybe PlayStation 2 era-ish. And, but I might lean towards something like old school or PC, like CRPG, or maybe we'll just do Wrath of the Righteous next. I don't know. We'll have to see. I might take a vote on it on Friday and then go from there. Anyways, thank you so much for stopping by. Let's find someone to host. Until then, everybody, thank you for staying here and stay happy, stay healthy, stay awesome. Let's find someone to host.